Hey guys, welcome back. It's Ripe again, back with more entitled people stories. In today's video, my ridiculously entitled neighbor Karen called the police on me for enjoying a cold beer in my garden. She claims that drinking it is illegal and wants me banned from the neighborhood. Here is what happened. So I live in a small house in a neighborhood that's on a cul-de-sac. I live by myself, so there's no need for me to have a large house, but I sprung for a place that had a large garden so I could sit outside during the warm months and enjoy the birds or insects that moved around the yard. I had recently taken up gardening as something to do to keep me occupied when I wasn't at work, and it was the perfect hobby for me as it got me out of the house. Before that, I spent most of my free time watching television or messing around on my computer, which is not the best thing for my eyes. Being able to head outside and plant new flowers with the sun shining down on me was a nice way to spend the weekend. Plus it means my backyard looks beautiful. So I have a neighbor named Karen who clearly has something against me that I haven't been able to figure out yet. She is part of the local homeowners association, which means she feels she has the right to tell other people what to do. For example, I got a letter one time that told me to dispose of some of the flowers in my yard as they were an eyesore that they wanted me to get rid of. I was confused since the majority of the flowers were not visible from the street and could not possibly bother anyone except for the people on either side of me. I knew it had to be Karen because the man who lived on the other side of me was friendly and his wife often gave me advice for keeping my plants healthy. There was no way they would report me to the HOA if they had a problem instead of coming to me with any and all issues. I refuted the letter and explained that I had no intention of getting rid of my flowers, and I was told I could keep them in my yard since it seemed the other members of the HOA were not as crazy as Karen. She confronted me once when I was outside admiring my garden, and she stormed over to me. I looked up from my watering can and said a warm hello, but she ignored my greeting and raised her voice at me. "Karen, it's your fault that I have all these bees in my yard." Me, what? "Karen, there are bees all over my yard. They were not here before you moved in, so I know it's because of you." Sorry, but it's not like I'm a beekeeper. I just like flowers. Plus, bees are nearly endangered, so it's good that you're seeing more of them. Karen, well, I don't like them, so you need to get rid of your flowers. Me, you tried to do that before, Karen, and it didn't work. I'm not getting rid of them. I love gardening. Karen, I think it's strange that you like to garden. Why is that strange? Because you're a man. You should be fixing things or working with tools, not playing around with flowers. Well, Karen, did you actually need something? Because I would like to get back to my plants. I continued watering my flowers and Karen eventually walked off with a huff. I was not interested in having a discussion with someone who was so rude and disrespectful for no good reason, so I was glad that she left. I had not seen that many bees in my own yard, and they have a tendency to keep to themselves unless bothered, so I did not see what the big deal was unless she was allergic or something. Either way, I did not feel like it was my fault or warranted getting rid of all my plants. For context, I'm originally from Germany and I am in touch with my roots in a variety of ways. I also enjoy having a couple of beers on the weekend to unwind, especially when I can drink them while looking out over my garden. It is relaxing and peaceful, and I like to try out different types of beer since there are so many brands and flavors out there that I want to eventually taste. And I bet OP is enjoying all those damn passion fruit and mango IPAs. Good lord. Anyway, I keep a record of everything that I try and I rank it, but that's more for myself than anything else. Karen seems to have a problem with that, as there have been a few occasions where she comes out to yell at me while I'm enjoying a beer and telling me that I'm disgusting for enjoying alcohol openly. I reminded her that I was on my own property and to kindly leave me alone, which she did, but not without some attitude. This year, I decided to hold an Oktoberfest party for my friends and neighbors. It was not anything huge, as I don't have enough space to host a big event, but there were a decent number of people. I told everyone to bring their favorite beer so we could all have something to drink and so everyone could try something new. Some people were in the house watching television or chatting with each other, while the rest of us were hanging out in the backyard. We were scattered over the property, but I made sure people were not being too loud or throwing their trash in my perfect garden or something like that. However, Karen was not happy about the situation. I had seen her poke her head out a few times to see what we were doing, and I had hoped she was just curious about the party, but it became clear that that was not the case. She came over the first time to ask us to please keep it down, and I relayed the message to everyone before inviting her to join us, but she declined and went back to her house. I cannot say that we were quiet, but it was only 6 in the evening, so it was not like anyone was trying to sleep or something. She came out later again with a disgusted look on her face. Karen, do you have to drink so much? Me, it's an Oktoberfest party, so the beer is a necessary part. We have some non-alcoholic beer if you wanna try that. Karen scoffs, no, I don't want that disgusting crap. Tell your guests to stop drinking now. Neighbor, we are not going to listen to you, lady. Me, you can either join us or leave, but I don't appreciate you trying to control what my guests do here. At this point, she slapped the can of beer out of my hand and tried to push me back, but was not quite strong enough. Me, what the hell is your problem, Karen? You need to leave my property now. Karen, I'm calling the police since you won't stop drinking. Her antics had drawn the attention of most of the people at the party, and they were now looking in our direction, whispering amongst each other. I watched as she called 911, knowing full well that I was not in the wrong and that the police would agree with me on that. She stared us down with her arms crossed while she waited for the police car, and then got a smug look on her face when they arrived, as if she would be victorious at the end of this encounter. A middle-aged cop came up with his younger partner, and I introduced myself since this was my house and my party. I started explaining the situation, but Karen cut me off and complained that we were being loud and drinking alcohol. The cop seemed kind of confused by that, and she actually tried to claim that it was illegal for us to be drinking out in the open. The older officer calmly explained to her that people were allowed to drink on their own property and that as long as we were not trespassing on her land, we could have as much alcohol as we wanted. She did not like that answer and said as much, which caused me to respond by laughing at her. That pushed her too far and she rushed at me and started hitting every part of my body she could reach. It did not exactly hurt, but it did shock me, and I tried to back away, but she kept following me and throwing punches. The younger officer grabbed her arms and told her to stop, but she kicked at him and elbowed him in the face. That caused the other officer to step in, and he held her back with ease, slapping cuffs on her and reading Karen her rights. One of them stayed to take a statement from me since this whole situation had turned into her assaulting me and a police officer. I pressed charges even though I knew they were not going to let her off the hook for assaulting an officer. Honestly, I just did not want to deal with her anymore. I have not seen her in a while, and I have a feeling she might end up selling her home to pay for the various legal fees and fines that she might be facing. She was kicked out of the HOA because they don't look too kindly on one of their members getting arrested. The rest of my party went great since the guests had something exciting to talk about and no one else was going to stop us from enjoying our beer. And yeah, Ripe Stars, it seems like sometimes if you have an entitled neighbor that tries to make your life miserable, if you just wait it out, at some point they might do something super stupid like calling the police on you and then assaulting a police officer, so pretty much the problem takes care of itself. I guess you just need to have the patience to endure this Karen misery. Anyway, if you enjoyed the story, please don't forget to like the video and maybe even post a comment if you want to support me. Thank you so much. The next one is titled, Neighbors Terrorize Me for Years, I Get Revenge with the Help of a Cat. Posted by user lburquist6 on r/ripestories, which is our own subreddit. The events of this story take place during my teen years, 13 to 17 years old, when my mother and I moved into a new rental property. The details might be a bit patchy here, as I don't have a lot of good memories associated with this house and I've done my best to forget about a lot of the events of these years. However, I do have one good memory of petty revenge I got one day on a neighbor. Just to give you a little bit of backstory, my family had very limited funds at the time and had just used what little spare money we had on moving expenses. We could not afford to move again, so did not advocate as much for ourselves as we should have, maybe. Literally, on the day we moved in, we turned on the radiator heaters and discovered that the radiators could not be turned on as the radiators caused a leak in the living room ceiling. The landlord was aware of this but would not be fixing this and told us to buy a space heater to keep warm in the winter. Neither would he be fixing the broken downstairs bathroom or replacing the roof, and he told us that if we wanted the walls painted, we could buy paint and do it ourselves. We had not asked about paint, he just volunteered that we could put our time and resources into improving his house if we wanted to, which of course we did not want to do. The worst thing he ever did was open our door one Saturday morning without notice or even knocking, while we were still in our beds upstairs, and shout into our house that he was just checking in. This was a clear violation of our lease, and he left without telling us that he would let our sick cat outside when he opened the door. Luckily, I found the little guy on a porch across the street later that day, but I was so mad at our landlord. This story is not about horrible landlords though. It's about our neighbors Karen, 40 female, and Ken, 40 male. The backstory was to explain why we wanted nothing to do with our terrible landlord, and it just so happened that the day we moved in, Karen and Ken, who lived next door, told us that they were his friends, implying that if we did anything they did not like, he would be hearing about it. It was hard to avoid Karen and Ken, since we shared a front porch with them, row house, and they were true to their word. And by the way, Ripe Stars, what worse can you imagine than having a terrible landlord and the terrible neighbors next to you being friends with him? Anyway, if our lawn got too shabby, Karen and Ken let him know. If our trash cans did not have lids, Karen and Ken called the county to put violation stickers on our cans. If the rat inspector was in the neighborhood, they sent the inspector under our back porch. It was like walking on eggshells in our own home. So despite all of this, or because of it, we tried to stay on good terms with these terrible neighbors for the first couple of years. We would not say anything to Ken when he came into our yard for dandelion greens for his pet iguana without even asking for permission. Then, around when I was 15 years old, Ken asked me if he could hire me for a job. He and his family would be going on a family vacation that winter, and he needed a dog walker for his daughter's dog. We agreed on a rate, I don't remember how much, and I walked his dog for him 3 times a day for 2 weeks, even when it snowed. The dog was elderly and did not give me any trouble, but I could have done without the bad weather. My mother was very proud of me for taking the job, as she hoped this would be a fresh start with this family and we would get on better terms. Once Ken and his family returned from vacation, I gave him an update on his daughter's dog and told him how well behaved she had been. I expected him to pay me, but he did not say anything about money. Since I was a shy teenager, I went home without payment but asked him about it the next time I saw him. He said, "It's my daughter's dog, ask her for your money." His daughter was a college student who was not even at home that much, but I couldn't force him to pay me, so I just left again without payment. About a week later, I saw his daughter, probably home for the weekend from college, but she said she didn't have any money when I asked and said that she would tell her dad to pay me. Guess what happened the next time I asked him? He was angry this time and repeated what he had said the first time, even when I mentioned asking his daughter. Yeah, I never got paid and my mother and I were too scared to ask again. Looking back on this, I feel like they knew how intimidated we were of their relationship with our landlord. One call to him about us harassing them and we would be homeless. They knew we were terrified of them and that they would never have to pay me for walking their dog. So yeah, they took advantage of a 15-year-old kid. Around this time, or maybe a year later, my mom had a conversation with Karen. Karen had actually been friendly recently. She took an artistic photo of our cat in our kitchen window. A black and white photo with interesting light going across the cat's face, which she then gave to my mom since she thought it looked pretty. We thought the whole interaction was odd since Karen admitted to hating cats in the past, but my mom accepted the photo like an olive branch. Then Karen mentioned a tree growing in our backyard. It was what we call in this area a trash tree, since it is the fast-growing variety. She said she was worried it was going to drop seeds into her yard and spread, but her brother could help us with it if we liked for like $100. My mom considered it and thought it was a good price, so she agreed. Looking back on it, I know that our landlord probably should have been the one to pay for this, but my mom was worried that he would come to the house to cut it down himself, so she agreed to let Karen's brother do it. Over the course of 2 days, Karen's brother cut down the tree and hauled away the rubbish. When he sent us the bill, it was $300. When my mom asked about the price, he insisted that the job was bigger than he had anticipated, which resulted in the 3-time cost. He got angry about being questioned as well, so my mom cut him a check. That was the second time we had felt taken advantage of by them. My mom was a single mother struggling to make ends meet and they knew this. $300 was a lot of money for us. They constantly reminded us of their relationship with our landlord, being sure to stand outside and chat with him for 30 minutes following our biannual inspections. On one particular visit, the landlord stared at our front yard as if expecting it to be shabby and said, "It looks good. I don't know what they were talking about," since he had obviously been informed otherwise. No matter what we did, Karen and Ken hated us and wanted us gone, and would not stop mentioning any little thing they could to our landlord. At a certain point, around when I was 17, we stopped making nice with them. No more cordial smiles and waves were exchanged on either side. On one particular day, my mom and I were gardening in the front yard. Ken, who was a little less hostile than his wife, did greet us as he opened his front door. He left it open as he was painting and walked away. And here comes the revenge. Our neighborhood had a bit of a feral cat problem. We had been feeding the cats, which Ken and Karen in particular viewed as vermin, perhaps that's why they hated us, and my mom was friends with another woman in the neighborhood who was helping to catch and fix the cats. One cat in particular that hung out in our yard was grey and less than a year old. I'll call her Jillian, or Yillian, I'm not sure how to pronounce that, for the purpose of this story. Jillian usually stuck to the backyard, which is why I was surprised to see her in the front yard while gardening. She was a feral cat who had never been in a house in her whole life, so I was shocked to see her sniffing around Ken's open door. I did not expect her to go into their house, but I didn't discourage her either, and inside she went. I started laughing, picturing the look on Karen's face when she saw a cat in her house. I love cats, so if I'd been a little older, I probably would have kept Jillian away from those people to protect her, but as a teenager, all I could think of was the satisfaction of getting sweet revenge on Karen and her husband after all the years of grief they had put us through. And then I heard it, that shrill scream and running footsteps. I did my best to stifle my laughter, knowing what had happened. Karen was facing her worst nightmare, a small fluffy adolescent kitten. My conscience was eating at me a bit because I didn't know what those people would do to Jillian, and also maybe I could get a closer look. I knocked on the ajar door and asked if everything was okay, since I heard a scream. Ken told me there was a cat in his house and asked if it was mine, even though he knows we had inside cats only. I told him it was a feral cat who had never been handled, but I volunteered assistance catching her. Ken led me upstairs where I saw it. That sweet, sweet pro-revenge. Ken said the cat was in the bathroom, and as I walked down the hallway, Karen peeked around the door, perhaps wondering who her husband was talking to, and then she looked back to the bathroom, eyes wide and wild, and let out another shriek. I was looking at a grown woman in her 40s screaming at a little cat like it was a rat. I don't know how I didn't laugh again in her face as she slammed the bedroom door to hide, but I will never forget the look on her face. It was so worth it. With Ken behind me, I went into his bathroom. The cat was climbing the shower curtain, and I didn't blame Jillian for being scared. I was scared of Karen too. She let me hold her under the armpits away from my body and did not bite or scratch as I lifted her off of the shower curtain and carried her out of the house to be released back into the yard. Ken thanked me, but he gave me a suspicious look like he thought the cat might have been mine since she didn't attack me. But I did not care about his unvoiced suspicion. I'd gotten to see his ridiculous wife acting like an elephant who was spooked by a mouse. However, things did not improve with those neighbors, not that we had expected them to. They even complained a year later when we moved out about how much space our moving van took up on the day we finally got out of that house. I adopted Jillian and took her with me when I moved. I still own her today, and she is no longer feral. Sometimes I pet her and think about that revenge she helped me get on Karen. I know it was a small payback on those people, but the real win was finally getting away from them. And yeah, Ripe Stars, I can imagine how good that felt for OP, and I'm very glad that they could leave those neighbors behind, finally. And also props to her for adopting that cat. And now let's move on to the next story. It starts like this. I have a neighbor that I always saw as a little bit odd. We live in a place where people end up with pretty big areas of land, and while the space makes it possible to not know your neighbors, we all do anyway. She is always just making weird decisions that don't seem to make any sense, like I noticed she once ordered and stored a ton of hay on her property. The thing is that she has no livestock, so the hay just sat there for over a year before it finally ended up getting dumped. The point I want to make is that this woman makes decisions that don't have any logic behind them, and I gave up a long time ago trying to find any logic in her actions. She had bought a camper RV, and I actually thought it meant she was going to go on vacations and maybe give me a break from her. Instead though, it just seemed to sit there for a while until she packed a bag, got into the camper, and drove for about 2 minutes right onto my property. I understand wanting to camp somewhere close to home, but that was ridiculous. I had told her to get off of my property, but she just kept saying that it was her campsite and that I should deal with it. I wanna just note that while it sounds like she was not all there upstairs, she had a total understanding of what she was doing. This was not the first time she had tried to do stuff on my property either. I got the same talk from her that I always did, how I should be a good neighbor and let her do things on my land because it was bigger than hers and I had space that she didn't. If my land was bigger, it really wasn't by much and I did not want her hanging around on my property. I had called the police on her before, but since she is my neighbor and so close to the property line, they mainly just warn her and just leave. This just fuels her entitled behavior, and she seems to at least once a week move her camper onto my property and use it as her personal little campsite. Honestly, I know that her real reasoning is so she can make a mess and not have to clean it up. Also, she doesn't want to pay to stay at an actual spot for campers, so she just tries and succeeds in using my property for that. I didn't know what to do and I was playing around with the option of just privately suing her. I had the police reports and even video evidence that she had been on my property. That might only get me a small amount of money and she would still end up saving by doing this on my property instead of somewhere else she is meant to be. One day was different though, and after I went to bed I noticed that it was pretty loud near the edge of my property. This was where she usually set up camp, but this time was not only very different but finally over the line. She was having some kind of party where people were dancing to music and getting drunk. I also saw smoke because they had started a bonfire and were cooking over it. I was beyond mad because I knew that whatever part of the ground they had started the fire on was now destroyed and going to be my problem. I wanted to call the cops about the illegal party and I was going to be more aggressive and demand they do something about the neighbor using my land as her own personal camping grounds. Before I could get to the phone though, I noticed that the smoke was getting bigger. The music had stopped and I heard people making different kinds of noise. I could not see too clearly from where I was, so I went outside and got a little bit closer. It turns out that the smoke was not only coming from the bonfire, but from my actual property. They did a bad job securing where they set the fire, and now it was spreading around my property. People were trying to put out what they could, while I heard another say that they called the fire department to help put it out. Just a side note, that where I live it gets very dry, so a fire like this needs to be put out right away or it would spread. That also means that starting a bonfire in a yard like this is actually a really stupid idea, and while it is not illegal, it will get you a stern talking to. At first, the fire marshal was giving me the lecture before I explained that it was my neighbor who was illegally on my property that started the fire. The police always come here when the fire department is called, so they were also hearing what I was saying. One officer, I guess, had enough of coming out here to listen to how my neighbor kept going onto my property without permission. The fire could have been way worse and burned down my entire house if it was not caught early enough. Or it could have spread the other way towards the trees and really gotten out of control. Neighbor was finally getting what I wanted to happen from day one. She was getting arrested, only now it was not for trespassing alone, it was also for arson. She got taken away saying that she had the right to camp and that it was not arson, because if it was, she would have burned down my whole house. That obviously did not help her case. The next day I noticed that her camper was still there on my property and she was not home, so I could do only one thing that I thought would be great revenge. I called a tow company and told them that there was a camper parked on my property that did not belong to me. They had to come with a special kind of truck that was made for big things like RVs and campers. It was going to be towed away at the expense of neighbor, and since she was dealing with the police at the station, she could not do anything about it. It turns out the local place where cars get towed to is not actually able to handle something like a camper, so it had to be taken 30 miles away. Much more expensive, but all of this is going to be at the expense of the owner. I finally saw her again later that day after she ended up working things out and getting a ton of fines regarding fire safety. She had to pay thousands of dollars for the fines and pay me for the property damage. She also had to take a fire safety class that I just have a feeling would be long and boring. When she noticed the camper was gone, she started yelling at me and telling me that I stole it and yet she was going to sue me for this. I just calmly handed her the info for the towing company and said that it was illegally on my land, so I made sure that it got moved. I have no idea how much a towing cost is for a camper that had to be driven to a special lot 30 miles away. What I can say is that it must have not been worth it because I never did see that camper again. In fact, she stopped coming onto my property in general after that, and I have a feeling they told her to stop trespassing or she was going to get arrested again. And with this, we have reached the end of the video. However, if you cannot get enough of my content, please check out my endless playlist, where you can find thousands of hours of content. In addition, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel to not miss any of my daily uploads. Thank you so much in advance, and I hope to see you again tomorrow.